This is episode number 96, hard to believe, featuring Laurie Kersey.
This is the PleinAir podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Thank you, Jim Kipping. This podcast is brought to you by Lilidol Art Instruction Video. They pretty much invented the art instruction video business 30 years ago and have hundreds of videos available from some of the best painters in the world, make great Christmas and Hanukkah gifts. Got to be thinking about that stuff now. Anyway, you can learn more at Lili, L-I-L-I, artvideo.com, liliartvideo.com. The interview is underwritten by the PleinAir Convention coming this April, and it's going to be in San Francisco and wine country. C.W. Mundy calls it the Woodstock of plein air painting. A great name. The ultimate gathering place for plein air painters. You see the world's top painters teaching, demoing, speaking. We have a giant expo hall, and we all go painting together. It is a blast. We have instructors there to work with you in the field, too. So join us. You can learn more at pleinairconvention.com. And coming up after the interview, I'll be answering a few art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But first, let's get right to our interview with Laurie Kersey. Well, Laurie Kersey, welcome to the PleinAir podcast.
Well, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
I am so impressed with your career and what you've done. I was on your website earlier today in preparation for this, and the list of things that you've done, events that you've done, shows that you've had, accommodations, awards, it's massive.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. I was just kind of putting one foot in front of the other, and I don't know. They just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, sure they did.
Yeah, I don't know.
So let's kind of probe all that. Let's kind of go back to the very beginning, because I like to understand where you came from. So where did you come from? Did you grow up out in California?
No, not hardly. I was actually born in Canada, in Brandon, Manitoba, Canada, and then when I was a little baby, my parents moved to the States and bounced around sort of the northeastern region quite a bit. I did grow up mostly in Ohio. So most of my school years were in rural Ohio.
Like where? Rural where?
Which is a far cry from California. It's a little town called Canfield, which was outside of Youngstown.
All right.
And we had an old farmhouse and some acreage. My father was a horseman, so we had some pasture land and horses and all that farm-type stuff.
Well, that explains why you have a lot of horse paintings.
That partially explains the horse thing. Yeah, there's horses in the blood, so I grew up around them. But he was racing horses, so they were race horses, and you didn't really let the little kid play with the race horses too much. You know, they're very young and explosive, the horses. So I had somewhat exposure. But I started riding later on, and so there's a whole nother chapter in the horse thing that fuels the painting.
Well, they say that a person who's a horse person can spot a painting of that's not been done well of a horse pretty instantly, because they become so intimate. They understand their anatomy. They understand how they act and how they feel. And if you don't nail it, people who are horse people really know the difference.
Yeah, but the same is true of boat people. If you've got one rope out of place, they'll know it. But that is true of horse people. And oddly enough, I judged an online competition one time, and I was kind of surprised to see so many horse entries. And I don't know if they did that just because they saw that I had, some horse paintings, but they probably should not have done that. They should have just entered their best piece, because there were a number of horse paintings where I immediately see anatomical issues, and nope, So I would suggest go with your strongest suit, whether it's what the judge does or not.
So what's that process like judging a show? Because there are a lot of people listening who are entering shows. You're looking at lots and lots and lots of paintings. You're looking at them on a computer screen. What tends to stand out in that environment?
Boy, you are right. There are so many. It's very tedious, long process of at least the ones that I've done, because there are so many entries. And I make multiple passes through. The first pass is pretty easy. The no's are pretty obvious, and the yeses are pretty obvious. And I thin it down. And then I have to go through again and thin it down, and, probably 3, 4, 5 times until I get down to the number I'm supposed to have. But the things that stand out, immediately strong design, and value. Part of that is value pattern, and the structure of the value pattern is the first impact, when you're glancing at something for a couple of seconds.
Would you articulate the difference between value and value pattern?
Well, value refers to how light or dark of
Right.
a particular shape or area. Value pattern would be how you arrange those lights and darks, the design of how you arrange those lights and darks within your parameters. So it's a design issue. Is it dark over here and light over there, too much light and not enough dark, or is it all dark and no mids, or is it all mids and no lights and darks, and how they arrange within each other. It would be easier if I could show you, but it's hard to do it verbally.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, that's why we have a podcast on painting, because we can't show anybody anything. It's kind of doesn't make sense, does it?
Perfect plan.
Well, I'll think that through.
But I think that's the first thing that jumps out, and then so design issues, and then execution is usually pretty clear at a first glance. Some things are just obvious mistakes in execution, whether they be drawing mistakes, perspective, that sort of issue, or lighting mistakes, or kind of lack of lighting sometimes, temperature issues, usually jump out and will put you on the no list. The yeses are really easy.
Well,
and
until
the
it
problem
comes down to the point of picking the best yeses, right?
Exactly. When it comes down to the end and you have to eliminate some of the yeses, that gets really difficult. Because then they're all good. You're just left with all the good ones, and you're like, oh, no.
Yeah, that's the tough part. Well, listen, I kind of got away from the history thing, but I wanted to grab that opportunity because it was a good opportunity to hear your thoughts on that. And why should people enter art competitions at all, or should they?
Oh, sure. I think you should. Their exposure. I know people that matter look at them, whether they're gallery people or magazine people or just other artists who maybe can help or whatever. Sure, people see them. It's exposure, and that's a good thing. It's also a possibility for some feedback sometimes, and that's always helpful. So put it out there.
Yeah, to the idea of putting it out there, I think there's also the element of putting it out there. Sometimes when you put yourself out there, it kind of changes your mindset about being out there, because you're kind of getting a feel for how you measure up, and you
Mm-hmm.
know, it's a great learning experience.
It is. It can kind of help point you and where you need to go in your next step down the path,
Yeah. So let's go back to the path. You were in Ohio.
I'm a kid. I'm a kid in Ohio,
You're
right?
a kid in Ohio.
and people often ask, how long have I been painting or how long have I been an artist or something, and my usual answer is since crayons, because I really was. I remember being, I think, 7 and sitting on the floor at the coffee table with the, if you remember, the coffee can full of broken crayons.
Yep,
You probably had one too.
I did.
And
Still
drawing
do.
with the other, yeah, drawing with the other kids. And I remember the other kids asking me to draw them a horse because I could draw a horse. So that was pretty early on. I was getting some kind of positive feedback. And the next thing I remember was in 5th grade, which would be 11-ish.
Yeah.
The art teacher did a showcase of my drawings or whatever I had in the school there. I had my own. It was my solo show, my first solo show in the little showcase. So again, I get some positive feedback at an early age. I don't remember my math teacher singling me out as being very good, but that sort of thing, I guess, makes an impression when you're a kid. And as I said in my paperwork there, my mother was an artist. She was, in the early days, at that point, she was painting in oils, and she switched to watercolors later on. But so, I was around it.
Was she a hobbyist? Was she a professional?
She was a hobbyist. She had, so when I was in school there, we had a big old farmhouse, and it had a big old kitchen, and she would have, I think there would be about 4 ladies every Friday evening in the kitchen set up and painting.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah, it was cool. And, I was a teenager or a kid, and I wasn't totally into it, but it was there, and I got it. I understood. I would come down and see what kind of cookies that one lady would always bring, but it was cool to be around, and I didn't, even though I didn't join them and paint with them, it was just exposure, I guess.
Well, you never know the influences of little things like that.
Yeah.
We have here where we live, we have a little cabin on the property, and all the artists, when they come in to shoot videos with us, they stay in the cabin, and I always bring them in and introduce them to the kids, if the kids are around, and the kids are like, "Dad, not another artist," but I'm hoping that there will be some influence at some point where they'll look back on that and go, "Wow, I can't believe that I ignored this person."
I think you probably got the kid attitude on the outside. But yeah, they're aware, on the inside. They probably something sinking in.
Yeah, probably so. So what happened after Ohio?
See, immediately after high school, I got a scholarship to do a summer art program at Chautauqua, New York.
Oh, wow.
Have you ever heard of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a great art center.
Oh, that's right. You're back east, aren't you?
No, I'm aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Well, this was. I'm going to date myself here, but it was 1979, so it was quite a while ago, and it was a fabulous experience because I guess for those who don't know, it's a little gated community, and it's a center for the arts. And it's all the arts. They've got, visual arts, drawing and painting and sculpture. There's music and dance and theater and opera and you name it. It was all of the arts, and they have these summer programs for all of this. And so just to be immersed in all that was a really cool experience. And I think about it sometimes like, boy, I'd like to do that again.
They'd probably love to have you.
Well, it's funny. I looked them up online, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And this, I don't even want to think about how many years this has been, 35 years or 40 or who knows. But they've gone quite modern in their art program. So it's not quite my cup of tea anymore, but it would be a cool place to hang out.
Well, just say the word. I've got a friend who's a board member, and there's a couple people that went on our Cuba trip who live in that community, and so.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, we'll get them back to what they should be doing.
Yeah, we'll straighten them out. Actually, the thing I remember most was the little park. There's a little green square right in the center of town. The proverbial small town green, and you could go out there at any day, and there would be. I don't know, there'd be an artist sketching or painting over there. There'd be a musician playing their instrument under this tree. There'd be a dancer practicing over there. And I remember a couple of guys with wooden swords rehearsing their sword fight scene, It was just a really cool, inspiring experience. But anyways, that was just the summertime. And then I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, which was a commercial art program. My thinking at the time was, everybody hears, oh, you can't make a living as an artist. So I figured, well, okay, I'll do this, commercial art. I get a job and a paycheck, and so I headed in that direction. And I graduated from the Art Institute in 1982.
So how'd that go for you? That making a living as a commercial artist thing?
Well, it works. You show up, you get your paycheck. I did that career for 15 years, and it was okay, but I guess a couple of things. One that I found frustrating was that you are, even in the illustration projects that I had, because I did art direction, I did graphic design, and I did some illustration over the period of years. And even the illustration projects, you're creating to please someone else. You're trying to paint what's in the client's head, or your ultimate goal is to please them. And for me, that got frustrating because I want to paint what I want to paint, and and please myself. So that was a frustration. And then the other thing was when computers came along, and I had no interest in sitting in front of a screen and tippy typing stuff. That just did not look.
Did you say tippy typing?
Tippy typing. tippy tip on the keys. And so I was kind of, I think I'm out of here. I'm not liking this. And I was painting on the side, just in my own free time for fun. And I said, that is way more fun. I was just way more interested in whatever little painting I had going at home than my professional work I was doing at the office. And so I eventually got frustrated enough to chuck it.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living at the last point. I was living on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which is a little barrier island, beach resort area off North Carolina, which was gorgeous. But
well, it's not exactly that where you're living now isn't gorgeous.
Yeah, I know. I went from one gorgeous coast to the other gorgeous coast. But I eventually.
Laurie lives in. You live in Monterey, Carmel, right?
Yeah, I'm in Pebble Beach, right next to Carmel, California. Spectacular coastline. But let's see. Oh, so I chucked it all. I sold everything. Got it down to a little pickup truck, and drove cross country to San Francisco initially. And I had done a few little research things, and I found, hey, San Francisco has this really interesting art school. And so I decided to take some classes there. In the process of switching over from commercial art to fine art painter, I took some classes at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and I lived there for 2 years, took some classes, and then and also met Brian Blood, who is now my husband. And then after that, I moved down here to Pebble Beach area.
So
The
you
rest is
taught
history.
there for a while, didn't you?
I taught at the academy. So when I went there, I mean, I was already painting, and I was already in some galleries, and I already kind of had a career going, but I just wanted to get a little more education, right? Can't hurt. So I took some classes there, and when I was finished with the classes, they offered me some teaching, and I started with sort of the foundation department, which is the first semesters that students would have, and then I kind of moved on up a little bit. But I ended up teaching drawing, painting, still life painting, figure painting, composition, color and design. I had kind of a number of different classes. Oh, and a pastel class.
And was Brian a teacher when you met him, or was he a student?
Yeah, he was a teacher there, and he taught for maybe more like a dozen years.
So when did the whole plein air thing happen for you?
At the academy, yeah, because that was my first introduction of painting outdoors. The painting I had done previously was studio work and still life. So some from life, but some from photos. But
well, they've had a pretty
been...
good reputation of plein air painting, or a history of plein air painting at that school.
Yeah, it was. They're definitely big on painting from life. So whether it's figure or still life or
Right.
landscape.
Right.
So certainly the going out on location and painting plein air is a definite part of their curriculum. Of course, that's San Francisco. So it's almost more cityscape. You have to take a pretty good bus ride to get out to some of the more just natural scenes. But we did a lot of trips over plein air.
I was out painting
painting.
one day. I used to live out in the Bay Area for 10 years, and I was out in Martinez. You would know where that is, but most people wouldn't. And I was, I had my bag, and I was getting ready to go painting, and I saw a bunch of painters, and so I went over, and they were all students from the academy with a teacher. And so it was kind of...
It wasn't Brian, was it?
It probably was. I don't know. It's been so long ago.
That was his class for years. The location painting class at the academy was his domain.
Probably was Brian. I didn't know him back then, so I barely knew anything about plein air painting back then.
Yeah, it was great fun, and I really value my academy education. I got a great education, and I didn't even go through the whole program. I was just doing some classes as a help to make my switch, but I was really happy.
I first discovered your paintings and fell in love with your work when I wandered into a gallery in Half Moon Bay. I don't remember the name of the gallery, and it probably doesn't even exist anymore. But and I think maybe you and Brian were in there. Because it was a garden gallery in Half Moon Bay, and unfortunately they did lose their building early this year, and so they are not in existence anymore. Oh,
and Brian and I were both in there.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's where I first saw and fell in love with your work, and I remember I think I ran into you somewhere, and I was telling you about your signature, how I always thought when I saw your signature on your paintings, it looked like it had been done by a sign painter because it was so perfectly done, and remarkably, it really made it really stood out, made your paintings stand out even more because most artists you can't read their signature, and then 100 years from now nobody knows who the heck it was.
Right.
So
well, that signature goes all the way back to the commercial art career when we did hand lettering. Like I said, before computers came along, so it's so old. It goes way back, and I suppose that's why it's easy for me. It's just hand lettering, but I just do it. A lot of people always ask me, "Is it a stamp?" No, it's not a stamp. For the record, it's not a stamp. I just write it like anybody else does. I just print it a little more neatly, I suppose.
Well, it looks like it would take you about an hour to do it. It's so perfectly
done. I actually timed it because people always ask me that too. It takes 5 minutes, and I do it on a dry painting. The only time I run into trouble is like at a plein air event when I have to sign that quick study or that quick draw
Yeah.
wet painting. That's really frustrating.
That's when you take the stamp.
No, no, but that's when I swear a lot.
So, you have a lot of varied subjects. You do landscapes, still lifes, horses, and you're very good at all of it. You mentioned earlier that, you didn't want to be painting what you didn't love.
Yeah.
And how do you balance that between what the galleries want you to paint, what's going to sell, and doing what you love? Is it what you love really comes through so much that you can paint what you love and it sells, or do you care?
I don't care. No, I do care to a degree, but it is a tricky sort of juggling act, and I know galleries in general would probably prefer an artist to paint one recognizable product. I know that's what they want, but unfortunately, that's not what they're going to get out of me. I guess in one of my sort of approaches is that I have different galleries that want different things.
Yeah.
So, okay, this one wants landscape. Fine, you get the landscapes. This one is more interested in the still lifes. Okay, I'll put those over here. So it's maybe not necessarily the same gallery is going to take all of those subjects, but I can place them in different places where they would fit, or or galleries and collectors would be interested. What was I just going to say? Oh, my brain. Anyways, I realized for me, if I was to try to limit myself to one of those, if I said, oh, I'm just going to do landscape, I'd go nuts. Or still life, or any one of them. I would just kind of go nuts. I need a little more variety. So maybe that's where the not caring comes in. That I know that's what they want, but I'm going to do it my way, and I'll just find a way to make it work. So mostly that means just placing different subjects in different places.
That's an interesting approach. It's pretty unusual because most people tend to be a specialist in one thing. They may get a lot of variety within that one thing, but I mean, even Brian, your husband, is pretty much a landscape painter most of the time, isn't he?
99%.
Yeah. See,
but,
I'm kind of with you. I get bored.
Yeah.
I have to do figures. I have to do still life. I have to do different things.
Yeah. But I find if I'm not in love with it, the subject, it's not going to turn out. If I force myself to, okay, they want more still lifes, and I have to, all right, and if I'm going to have to make myself do still life, they're not going to be my best work, I guarantee it.
Your heart's not going to be in it.
It's not. And if I'm all jazzed about, that new horse over at the barn, then that's the one that's going to turn out. And so I just have learned to just go with it, and then my work overall is better than trying to, force myself to paint something I'm not really into.
How often do you sell out on a painting? How often do you get to a point where you go, this one's just not working? And do you just keep working it, or do you give up? Do you put it aside for a while? What's
I've probably done all of the above. I guess I will try to, I'll give it, 3 attempts maybe. It's my baseball analogy. I'll give it 3 strikes, and then and then you're out. And I have learned to slash them and hack them into little bits. Don't just throw them out. My husband will pull them out of the trash, which is really annoying. But anyways, sometimes I'll set them aside and pull it out a month or a year later and try to resuscitate it. That usually doesn't work for me. If it doesn't work in the first three strikes, then I'll just hack it up, forget it, and go off in another direction. I to continue with my baseball analogies, I kind of see it as my batting average. How many times I strike out versus how many times I get a hit, and occasionally I'll hit a home run. But I think my batting average is slowly going up, over the years. I used to strike out more often, and now they're not as frequent. So I guess that's a good thing. That's progress.
I think it's a good thing for people to hear because, they assume that everybody like yourself, who's very well known, hits it out of the park every time.
Yeah. Well, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would be nice.
Actually, every artist I know at every level would tell you the same thing. They bomb you. They just don't show those.
Yeah.
Or even honestly, in teaching situations, everybody that I know that teaches workshops or has taught at the academy, you'd come in at some point and go, "Oh my God, I bombed on that demo. It was horrible. It was terrible." But from our perspective, it was horrible, maybe. But
yet somebody's begging you to buy it.
Right, or the students, got what they needed, got good information out of it, or whatever, and they thought it was great. But we all bomb. If you're professional, you just destroy them, and nobody ever sees them.
So
that's the trick.
Well, that's right. I was over at Randy Sexton's studio when he was still in San Francisco, and I was going through the racks, and he said, "Don't look at that stuff; it's all terrible."
Right.
And I was like drooling, because it was so beautiful. But he said, I just need to shred them. So I'm kind of curious. I want to talk more about painting in a second here, but I'm kind of curious. You're someone who is kind of living a bit of an unusual life, and that is that the two of you, a married couple, are both making your livings as artists. Oftentimes you'll see, the artist along with someone who's got another living so that they're able to make a decent living. What's that like, being married to another artist? Do you guys compete with each other? How do you manage that whole lifestyle?
Well, it adds in a whole nother interesting dimension to marriage that we do have to juggle, because we're, of course, married and then also business partners in a sense, and the two artists trying not to compete, because of course that's not going to be healthy marriage-wise. So it is kind of a tricky balance. It has its upsides, of course. I have built-in painting partner. We travel and paint, and all that's great. We can understand each other's struggles and frustrations and achievements and stuff, where sometimes I think a non-artist might not really understand if you're, tearing your hair out over some painting or whatever. And so that's really nice, just to have somebody who gets it. It has its little challenges too, as I said, just trying to not be competitive and to put that stuff aside and not let that muck up your relationship. But I was joking with someone the other day that I should have married a framer. I would have had it made, because in our situation, it's twice the frames that we've got to buy, and that's of course our biggest expense. So, well.
Well, let's talk about framing, because it's something that I think is never talked about enough. A good frame makes a huge difference, and yet
sure does.
It's the toughest thing for an artist to do, because a good frame is typically more expensive.
Yeah, it's a constant frustration, and I don't know what I've been 30 years I've been doing this, and it's still frustrating, because you want your paintings to look as good as they possibly can, but it's always a matter of, geez, how much can I really afford to spend on this, to get a nice frame, but without, and still pay the mortgage. So it's difficult, and I guess the upside is there are more framers out there these days. There's more selection, more opportunity, and sometimes, some of them you can find some decent deals. I remember back in the earlier days, you didn't have a whole lot of choices. There was kind of the real low end and then the real high end, and it was a definite one or the other. But now there's some stuff in the middle that's kind of doable for both.
Yeah, we've got quite a few framers who are in the expo hall at the PleinAir convention, and
yeah.
Last year I just basically took a trunk load home because they were offering some really great deals, and
Right.
I couldn't resist. So it was
Get it while you can.
and they were beautiful.
Yeah.
So you
So it is better than it used to be, I would say, on the framing situation, and even I don't know technically how they make them, but I think they're finding less expensive ways to make them so that they still look good, but they don't maybe cost quite so much.
Yeah, probably. And have you noticed that it makes a difference in the speed of a sale, or have you noticed that it makes a difference in the price you can get based on a frame?
I think price that you can ask. I think the painting looks expensive in a nicer frame. I don't know that it makes a difference in the speed of sale. I maybe haven't tracked that, but just off the top of my head, I wouldn't really notice that. But I think I feel better. I feel like I'm putting out a better product overall, and it looks expensive. It looks like it belongs in a nice. It looks like it belongs in a museum or something, as opposed to looking like it belongs at the thrift store. So it does make a world of difference, and I think the client or potential buyer sees that right off, even if they don't consciously, if they aren't consciously aware of it. I think at least just subconsciously it goes, boom. This is a quality item.
What percentage of your time is spent doing painting outdoors, creating studies, or finished paintings outdoors?
Well, under normal circumstances, I would say that was maybe a third.
Yeah. What do you mean by normal?
Well, I've had some health issues in the last couple of years, and it's down to a lesser amount at this point, just because I've not been well. But yeah, I'd like to get it back. I'd like to get that back as soon as I'm better. But yeah, normally about a third, I suppose.
Yeah, and are you teaching anymore? Are you doing any workshops anymore, or have you stopped teaching completely?
Well, I stopped for a while, and then Brian and I recently, within the last year, opened a studio. We got a new studio space here in Carmel at the Barnyard, where there are a number of other artists and Carmel Visual Arts. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but
Yep.
They do some workshops out of his space. We're right across the courtyard from him. But anyways, we have this space now, and I have done just one quickie one-day thing in there. Brian does a couple of plein air landscape location painting workshops each year, and we added on a day of drawing. So I start them on the first day with drawing in our studio space, and then they go out with him with hopefully a little bit of better grip on some drawing issues, so they can go tackle some painting issues. So we've done that once, and I've got another one of those coming up this next month in October. But I do want to do, for instance, still life floral painting in that space. But I got to go back to the health issues again. I'm not going to do it until I'm better, and then I can take on some more.
Well,
stuff.
I'm not going to ask about that because it would be inappropriate.
Yeah,
But best wishes,
fine, but
best wishes on that, and getting
thank
better.
you. But,
So let's talk a little bit about painting, because painting technique is always something that people want to know more about. And I don't know how you approach things. I know how Brian does because we did a video with Brian, but I've never watched you paint. What is typically your process when you're doing plein air painting? Walk me through the kind of the start process for you.
Well, I'm glad you quantified that by saying plein air, because I was about to say, well, it really depends, because it could be completely different depending on the situation, big painting, small painting, indoor, outdoor, figure, landscape, whatever. But if I was outdoor plein air painting on landscape, I would generally work on a smallish panel. 11 by 14 is probably typical. And I would tone it. I usually tone something in the neighborhood of brown paper bag or cardboard.
Now, are you toning that and letting it dry before you go out? In other words, do you tone all your canvases, or do you tone it on the spot?
Nah, I'll usually tone it on the spot, because I might, in certain situations, tone something different.
And are you toning it in oil or acrylic?
Oil.
Because some will tone in acrylic so it dries fast. Right.
I just tone in oil, and I do not real wet, so it's more elbow grease than solvent, and I'll just rub it down to a thin, tone. And I don't have any. If it's not wet, sopping wet, I don't have issues with painting over it or drawing over it or whatever I'm doing. So,
are you painting it? Are you creating a tone so that you're knocking the light down that's hitting your eyes? Or are you doing it so that you get an average, kind of an average background? Or are you doing it so that your background will bleed through the painting? What's your purpose in toning?
One of the first two. So most of the time I'm doing it just to knock off the white, but there are situations where I'm choosing a tone to go under. I'm just remembering a very green one I did recently in a very grassy green place, and I just toned the whole thing green, gradating from warm to cool, and then I can paint over it, and it's I can use that green because the whole scene was very, very green. But for around here, mostly coastal type things, I'll just do something neutral to knock back the white. And then a quick sketch in with that same sort of brownish tone, and I'm pretty minimal on the sketching, just some overall lines. I'm not drawing anything, carefully or intricately, just basic proportions of where things go. And then I'll usually start with almost my darkest dark. Not quite the dark accents, but one of my darker shadow tones. In most cases, it's like a shadow side of a tree or rocks or something. I'll start with those darker tones, and then
cool darks.
Well, depends on the light. We have a lot of fog here, so we get a lot of cool light. Just overcast, cool. So they could be warm darks. Okay. It depends on the lighting situation. But either way, I would start with those darker tones, and then the second thing would be I'd get the lights. Since I have a toned canvas, I'll come in with my lightest lights. So then I have my darkest darks, my lightest lights, and then I can kind of fill in between.
So what your range is going to be.
Yeah, I like to set my parameters. And then I can fill in the in-between stuff. If I start in the middle, sometimes I find, whoops, I was too light. Now everything's shifted up, or I was too dark, and everything's shifted one way or another. And for me, I find it easier to kind of just set the bookends, and then I can kind of fill in between. And I do work from big shapes down to smaller shapes. So pretty quickly and fairly loosely scribbling in those big shapes in the beginning. My personal tendency is of the perfectionist sort, and I can very easily get too tight, and so I strive, especially in the beginning, to be loose and just free, and it's hard for me. It's kind of against my nature, but I'm much happier with the painting in the end if I do that.
Well, it's
and
because of that illustration background.
It is, I suppose. And I might allow myself to tighten up here and there towards the end in my focal area, but I try to really refrain from that in the beginning of the painting.
Now, some painters will actually try to focus on their focal point or their focal area first because that's what they love first, and they want to put all their energy into that. What camp are you in?
Well, I am partially in that camp. So if I blocked in kind of loose and splashy and got all of my elements basically established, the basic tones and stuff, then I would immediately go to my focal point and get that established. And I would ideally leave some of that looser stuff in the less important areas untouched. But yeah, so I get basically a block in, then the focal point. And part of that is because for me, it's I feel better about what I'm doing if the sooner I get something down that looks like something, I can remain optimistic about the painting as I'm doing it, and partially just in case, as you know, things change around here. The fog rolls in, or the sun comes out, or that boat I'm painting drives away, or so at least I have that focal point in case things change.
And do you tend to go like back to front, sky to foreground? What does it matter?
I don't, I guess, follow too much that rule. I go more big shape to smaller shape.
Yeah. So what do you think are the things that make you different in the way you approach painting?
Well, I guess I might say edges. A little. I focus on edge control.
Let's talk about that, because it's something that doesn't get enough attention.
I love edges.
Yeah, how do you really feel?
For me, I think it's one of the things that makes something look real. And when I say real, I don't mean photographic. I mean real, the way human eyes see things. When our two eyes look at something, we see that focal point clearly, and then all our peripheral stuff is quite soft and quite loose. And I love to use edges to show where things are soft, and when they're objects are soft, or the way that we see things when values are close together, they kind of merge, or any of that stuff peripherally can be quite soft, and then hopefully some nice sharp ones to really add punch to your focal point, or to show how crisp a leaf edge is, or it's just those little variations between edges I think really make things kind of come to life.
So when everything's sharp and everything's in focus, it's pretty boring.
I find it static.
Static
would be my word. And if you can lose some edges and soften some things, suddenly for me it just starts to be real.
What's the best way to learn to do that?
Well, I would put away your photos because cameras, of course, see things very differently than we do. They see everything sharp focus. So stop looking at the photo and paint anything from life, and you will see those edges. Even just a simple, a couple of apples or something that you can set on your table. I think you will see them if you look at real life. And even just if you sit and look out your window right now and focus on one tree, I think you'll kind of see some softer edges if you kind of pay attention to the stuff that's around that. Start to notice it, just in everyday stuff that you look at.
I struggle with architecture,
Yep.
and I just think that making architecture look right for me is difficult. And then one of the things that I'm starting to understand and learn is how important edge work is in architecture, because that, the tendency is to make, let's say the side of a house, just crisp and perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I don't know, you got to break it up or something. You got to do something to make it not so perfect, because otherwise it doesn't read right.
Yeah. It's your brain knows that it is straight and hard and a 2x4 or whatever makes that corner there. But it's in a painting it doesn't look right. You if you can just break that line a little bit somehow. And two, it depends on what's behind it. If there's a somewhat closer value behind it, you kind of merge them together a little bit. And what's Carolyn Anderson?
Oh.
I saw a great demo, and she had a great line about edges, about between shapes. She said, "Leave a door open between those, between shapes." And I love that line. So I would do that. I would do that on the side of your building. Just leave a little door open there.
That's good advice. I just had to write that down.
Yeah. So the eye can travel from one shape to the next,
So one of the other struggles I hear a lot is struggling with greens and just struggling with color overall. What are your philosophies on how you approach it?
I'm kind of a minimalist, I guess. My brain goes right back to red, yellow, green, and just a basic color wheel. So I don't have a real extensive palette that I use. I stick generally to a warm and cool of each primary, and I prefer to mix greens. I sometimes will use Viridian on the palette as well, but usually it's 2 yellows, 2 blues, and I'll just mix the greens. So my brain sees things in terms of red, yellow, blue. So I would start with one of the yellows and one of the blues, and usually a speck of red. I look for lots of variety in greens. Of course, if we're talking about natural greens, trees and foliage and stuff, nature doesn't do, one color trees. She does this incredible array of color variety that we'll never be able to get, but we can at least, create numerous greens from that, those blues and yellows and little bits of red and stuff. Sometimes people, other artists, my husband, for instance, works more with complements. He'll use a tube green and red, or he'll use blue and orange, or, he thinks more in terms of complements, where I think more in terms of the 3 primaries. But ultimately it's the same, because blue and yellow make green, and you add red, and there's your complements anyways.
Right.
But I think any just, if you can take a little bit of time and a scrap of canvas and just muck around in your blues and yellows and see what you can make, and just sit out in your backyard and look at the trees or the grass around you and see if you can make something that's similar to some of the colors that you see out there. There's not a real formula. I would avoid formulas, and I would avoid an array of tube greens, and really just stick to to me, the simpler the better, and just stick to the primary colors, or maybe secondaries, and just keep it simple. And lean it this way, lean it that way, lean it cooler, lean it warmer, lean it a little bit towards blue, a little more towards yellow, a little more towards the red, and you'll find an amazing variety that you can get out of blue and yellow and a speck of red.
And you're a fabulous painter. You're very, very highly accomplished, very evolved as a painter. How do you go from being a good painter to being a great painter? Now that you've experienced that, can you give advice on how you got there?
It's funny, I don't feel evolved.
Yeah, well, we think you are.
I don't know. Oh gosh, I think one of the hardest things was, once you're done with your formal education, if you had one, and there you are sitting alone in your studio. Yeah, how am I supposed to get better now? It's not just practice. It's not just continuing to paint. You're just going to miraculously get better somehow. I do think you have to really work at it. You have to make yourself the teacher, and you have to come up with assignments for yourself to do, and give yourself assignments, and then you have to put on your other hat and be, the critiquer and critique yourself. So that's really hard to wear those hats. You're the student, you're the teacher, you're the critiquer or whatever. But you have to do that to yourself. And a few of the little things that I've found, you may have heard of the term chunking.
Yeah.
Actually, I think in Brian Mark Taylor's DVD I saw recently, he talked quite a bit about chunking, and I think that's a really helpful. Put on your little teacher hat and give yourself an assignment of, greens, mixing greens. I'm going to give myself this project, and you have to, then work at it. And I'm going to just mix up 10 different greens out of these blues and yellows. And that's your assignment, and you do that, and then you critique yourself and see how you did, and hopefully you can take little things, or whether it's trees or skies or whatever the assignment is that you've given yourself, and work on that one little thing, just like you were in school and had a teacher.
Yeah, we just did we did a video with Brian called The Master's Mind, and it really talks about how to learn as an artist, how to train yourself using chunking and a bunch of other techniques. So I think it's a very good point. Yeah, and the other thing I was going to say, copying the masters is a great exercise, and unfortunately, I guess I don't happen to have a master painting sitting right here. I'm going to have to work from a book or the computer, or whatever the best image I can finally find somehow. But are you allowed to go to the museums in San Francisco and copy?
I never did. There's usually a process you have to apply, and go through this whole process. You don't just wander in and set up and paint, but they may let you. I don't actually remember seeing anyone up there.
Yeah.
I've seen them in the Metropolitan, but
yeah, I have as well.
But copying master things, and also one of the little things that I will do is if I shoot just on your phone or whatever, shoot pictures of my pictures, or even in progress, and then just put them up on the computer next to whoever your hero is, your favorite painter, and go, okay, well, what's the difference? Oh, look, his shapes hold together better than mine. I need to work on that. Right. Or his values are clearer. He's got 3 values. I've got 10. Whatever you notice, if you can get them into the same sort of format. So mine's just a little picture on the computer, and his is a little picture on the computer, right next to each other, and you can sometimes see what is it he's doing better than me. So that's just another way that I can.
And what about advice
continue.
for brand new little bitty baby painters who are trying to figure out how to kind of enter this world of painting and plein air painting? Any thoughts of wisdom before we wrap it up?
Little baby painters. I cannot overstress the importance of education. Now that for everybody doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to go to a college, university situation and go 4 years, but I do think that just buying some paints and sitting down to paint and just diving in there is a setup for frustration without, that foundation of some knowledge of the principles of painting. So whatever kind of education you can get, and whether it's books and DVDs and workshops and whatever, or if there's a decent school near you that you can take a few classes or something, I would definitely do that and save yourself a lot of frustration and headache. And I would also say, please don't jump into painting without giving some attention to drawing. For some reason, I think a lot of people want to just skip over drawing, and I really do think it's the foundation. If your drawing is not solid, your painting is not going to be solid. So if I was going to advise a beginning painter, I would say, give some time and attention to drawing first.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this today. This has been really terrific. Where can people see your work?
In person, you could see Jones and Terwilliger Galleries in Carmel, Fairmont Gallery in Sonoma, K. Nathan Gallery in La Jolla, all of those in California at this point. And Jones and Terwilliger is also in Palm Desert, California. And then Brian and I have a studio in the Barnyard Shopping Center, which is also in Carmel. And then online at my website, which is lauriekersey.com. That's Laurie. And Facebook and Instagram.
Cool. Well,
okay.
Thank you for doing this today, and thanks for being on the PleinAir podcast.
Well, thank you, Eric.
This has been the PleinAir podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.
Thanks again to Laurie Kersey. What an amazing painter.
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions, and you can always email me, Eric@PleinAir Magazine, or you can even instant message me or text me on Facebook. All right, so here's a question. This is from Kim Cast in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. As an artist, Eric, should I be paying to be in a gallery? Well, this is a loaded question. We hear from a lot of galleries that charge artists to be in them. Some of them are legitimate, some maybe not so legitimate. You've got to do your homework. You want to talk to the artists, look on the website, talk to the artists they feature. Do they sell work? Do they market their artist? What else are they doing for you? Is it worth doing? What does it end up costing you ultimately? Can they be trusted? It boils down if they work or not work. Are they selling or not selling? Now, there are some legitimate pay-for-play galleries that people go into that work. But keep in mind, if your work is ready, you really should be able to find a gallery to represent you who will take a commission and sell your work on consignment. Usually that's 50%, sometimes less, depending on the stature of the artist. The goal here, remember, is to sell art, and for selling art, nothing beats getting into a really good gallery with experienced salespeople, a client base of collectors so they can help build you up, and a gallery who's advertising and promoting themselves and their artists. That's what you want to look for. You could also look for a local artist co-op gallery. It might be a good place to start. So you pay by giving your time, by working in the gallery part of the time, but you're not putting money out of your pocket. The question I always wonder is, if I'm putting money out of my pocket, if I'm paying you, what's the likelihood that I'm going to have you sell my art? So I think that's a good question. Thank you for asking it. Next question comes from David Terry of Jacksonville, Oregon. I know David. David's a fabulous painter and a fabulous commission painter, and he did my portrait. So David says, I have a prospective client call about commissioning a painting of his granddaughter. 2 great conversations about it, but all of a sudden nothing. I followed up with an email saying I looked forward to working with him, but I've had no response. What's next? Well, people tend to run and hide when they don't want to deal with something. So there's something in this discussion that went wrong. If somebody shows interest and then disappears, chances are he or she liked your work, they liked what they'd seen on your website, and so maybe the problem was price. And so I think what I'd do is I'd phone him and I'd say this: listen, you asked me about a commission for your granddaughter and I've heard nothing from you, so I'm guessing maybe my price was too high, but I'd really like to find a way to do it that's a win-win. Could we sit down and meet in person? No obligation. Let's see if we can work something out. I won't be offended if the price is too high, but maybe we can come up with an idea. All right? And then try to get him to meet with you. If you invest time in somebody, chances are they're going to give you their money, right? So ask him to bring his 5 favorite photos of his granddaughter. And then also anybody else you might want to have painted, bring some photos of them. Then you meet with him and you say, listen, show me the pictures. Before you even talk price or anything, show me the pictures. And you look at the pictures. And then you say, okay, I want to pull out some of my paintings. And you show him paintings in your portfolio of full body paintings, head to toe. You show 3/4, you show portrait, you show, just neck above and so on. And then you show different styles and you say, okay, which of these do you like? Which of the ones do you not like? Which of the ones, have the feel that you'd like to see hanging in your house, and so on. Get him engaged. Get him to start talking about it. Well, I like this. I don't like that. And you start writing that stuff down. Now that he's engaged, he's more likely to do it. Now, after that, you can just say, hey, listen, we've kind of talked about this, but the elephant in the room is probably the price. You disappeared on me, which I'm thinking is probably my price was too high. What do you really want to pay? And just be quiet. Don't say anything and say what he wants to pay. And he's going to say, well, I really didn't want to embarrass you and I didn't want to make you feel like your stuff wasn't worth it, but I couldn't possibly pay that much money. You say, oh, that's okay. I understand that. This happens all the time. What do you want to pay? And he'll say, well, I'd like to pay this or somewhere in this range. And you could say, well, that's more than that's less than I normally would get. But maybe we can figure out a way to get there. So you might say, like, what if I did this one and did one other at the same price? If I got 2 commissions, I'd be willing to lower the price for that. Or, could we compromise and not do such a big portrait? Could we do a smaller one and we can come in at your price? Look for something like that. And chances are you're going to get it. And chances are they're going to be happy and you're going to be happy because you have it. Now, you have to make the decision. Do you want to violate your pricing? And sometimes we all have to do it and sometimes we don't. You're just going to have to make that call. So I hope that helps. Today's podcast was sponsored by Lilidol Art Instruction Video, delivering quality art instruction video for 30 years. Learn more. See all the products, all the great artists teaching at Lily, L-I-L-I, lilyartvideo.com. The podcast is brought to you by the world's largest PleinAir convention, the only PleinAir convention, really, the world's largest PleinAir event. Come learn, paint, have fun with us. Visit PleinAirConvention.com. And if you've not seen my Sunday morning blog, it's called Sunday Coffee. I do it every Sunday. And you can learn more about it by going to the website for it and sign up. It's coffeewitheric.com. Last I looked, we were over 100,000 readers, so that's pretty cool. And the web, the podcast, wow, we're 420,000 or some such crazy thing. That's very cool. Anyway, this is fun to do. Let's do it again sometime like next week, and I'll see you then. My name is Eric Rhodes, and I'm the publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.